The world did not end with a scream, but with the soft final click of a mahogany coffin lid. It was a sound that echoed in the cavernous silence of Ilara's soul, a punctuation mark on a life of quiet devotion that, she was only now realizing, had been a one-sided conversation. The grand, soulless funeral home was a stage, and she was merely a stagehand in the final act of her parents' lives, an act where the starring roles had already been irrevocably assigned. Her father, Arthur, a titan of industry now reduced to pale, waxy stillness, lay at the center of it all. Her mother, Eleanor, had preceded him by only 6 months, and the double grief was a physical weight, a lodestone of lead tied to Ilara's heart, pulling her down into a cold, dark sea. But it was not their deaths that were breaking her. It was the living betrayal that stood weeping gracefully across the room. Isabella, her younger sister, the golden child, the one whose laughter was like wind chimes, whose every stumble was met with a safety net woven from golden excuses. Isabella, who now stood flanked by her 2 perfect children, their designer black clothes looking more like a fashion statement than a mark of mourning. Ilara's own children, Liam and Chloe, stood close to her sides, their small hands clutching hers, anchors in a reality that was beginning to warp and splinter. They were quiet, their young minds struggling to process the somber grandeur, the hushed voices, the way their mother's body had gone rigid with a tension they had never felt before. The service was a blur of polished platitudes and somber organ music. Ilara heard none of it. Her eyes were fixed on the family lawyer, Mr. Thorne, a man whose face was as unreadable as the legal documents he carried in his sleek leather briefcase. He had requested the entire family gather in the private sitting room after the burial. A formality, he had called it, a final wish. The air in the room was thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken anxieties. Ilara sat on a velvet settee, Liam and Chloe pressed against her, while Isabella and her brood occupied the larger sofa, a united front of entitled grief. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, the sound like gravel shifting in the profound silence. He spoke of Arthur's meticulous nature, his love for his family, his desire for clarity and fairness. The words were a soothing balm that Ilara desperately wanted to believe in. Then he opened the document. The last will and testament of Arthur and Eleanor Vance. He read through the preliminaries, the small bequests to loyal staff, the donations to favored charities. Ilara's heart beat a fragile rhythm of hope. Perhaps she'd been wrong. Perhaps her parents, in their final moments, had seen the imbalance, had recognized the quiet, steady daughter who had stayed close, who had cared for them in their final illnesses, while Isabella sent lavish floral arrangements from exotic vacations. Then came the division of the estate. The Vance fortune was not just wealth, it was a legacy. A multi-million-dollar empire built from nothing, a portfolio of properties, stocks, and holdings. Mr. Thorne's voice was calm, neutral, a river carving through the landscape of their lives. To my beloved daughter Isabella and her children, Sophia and Henry, I bequeath the entirety of my liquid assets, the majority stock holdings in Vance Industries, the Aspen Estate, and the Nantucket summer home. Ilara's breath hitched. It was a staggering bequest, but there was more. The family home, the brownstone in Brooklyn where she had grown up, where her own children had taken their first steps, the place where her mother's perfume still lingered in the hallways. And to Isabella, Mr. Thorne continued, his glasses glinting under the soft light, I leave the New York City brownstone in perpetuity, for her and her children's use. A cold numbness began to spread from Ilara's core. It was a mistake. It had to be. She was the one who had loved that house, who had maintained it, who had filled its rooms with the echoes of her own family's life. Isabella visited for holidays. She didn't live in its soul. Mr. Thorne's eyes finally flickered to her. And to my daughter, Ilara, and her children, Liam and Chloe. He paused, and in that pause, the world stopped spinning. I bequeath the sum of $50,000 and the lake cabin in upstate New York. Silence. It was a vacuum, sucking all sound, all air, all light from the room. $50,000. The cabin was a rustic, crumbling thing, a place her father had once jokingly called the money pit. It was worth less than nothing. It was an insult disguised as an inheritance. The rest of the vast fortune, the homes, the security, the future, everything was funneled to Isabella and her children. There was no mention of trusts for Liam and Chloe, No college funds, no acknowledgement of their existence as equal grandchildren. They had been erased. They were nothing. Ilara's vision tunneled. She saw Isabella dab a tissue to her dry eyes, a flicker of something that was not grief but triumph in her gaze. She saw her niece and nephew, already looking bored, heirs to a kingdom they had done nothing to earn. She felt the small, warm hands of her own children in hers, their confused faces looking up at her, sensing the cataclysm before they could understand it. This was the truth, laid bare in a sterile legal document. In her parents' eyes, Isabella's children were the royal line. Her own were the forgotten bastards. The love she had given, the sacrifices she had made, the countless times she had swallowed her pride and accepted the lesser gift, the smaller portion of praise. It all coalesced into a single shattering realization. She had never been loved as an equal. Her children were not loved as equals. They were afterthoughts. They were nothing. The fire that had been a dying ember in her heart was extinguished, drowned in the icy waters of this ultimate betrayal. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply stood, her movements slow and deliberate, as if moving through hardening concrete. She led her children from the room, away from the suffocating perfume of lilies and hypocrisy. She did not look back. The fall was complete. She had hit the ground, and the only thing left was the silence of the shattered. The cabin was a tomb, a monument to neglect that mirrored the desolation within Ilara's soul. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and dust, a cold that seeped through the warped window frames and settled in the bones. The $50,000, a pittance that felt like a deliberate slap, was a rapidly dwindling resource, swallowed by the immediate needs of food, heating, and the desperate attempt to make the hovel habitable. Liam and Chloe moved through the cramped rooms like ghosts, their laughter a forgotten language. They didn't understand the legal intricacies, but they understood the crushing weight of their mother's despair, the sudden severance from their home, their school, their life. Ilara's days were a blur of mundane survival. Chopping wood with blistered hands, the thud of the axe a dull counterpoint to the screaming in her mind. Scrubbing floors on her knees, the grime a tangible enemy she could fight, unlike the ethereal, gut-wrenching betrayal. At night, when the children were finally asleep, huddled together for warmth in the single bed she had managed to make comfortable, the silence would descend. It was in that silence that the memories would come, unbidden and cruel. She saw her mother's face, not as it was in the coffin, but alive, turning away from a crayon drawing Chloe had made for her, her attention instantly captured by a mediocre report card from Isabella's Sophia. She heard her father's voice booming with pride at Isabella's marriage to a feckless, charming man who would later leave her, a pride he never once bestowed upon Ilara's own quiet, stable marriage to David, a good man taken from them too soon by a swift and merciless cancer. She had been a widow at 35, and her parents' support had been a check, a distant phone call, while Isabella's divorce was treated as a national crisis, necessitating a new car and a trip to Bali to recuperate. The pain was a physical entity, a serpent coiled in her gut, feeding on the images of her children's confused faces. Liam, at 12, trying to be the man of the house, his small shoulders squared against a world that had suddenly become hostile. Chloe, only 8, crying silently in the night for her old room, for her friends, for the grandmother who had, it was now clear, never truly cherished her. Every tear they shed was a fresh brand on Ilara's heart. The injustice was not an abstract concept. It was the chill in their bones, the worry in their eyes, the slow dimming of their light. Weeks bled into months. The vibrant, capable woman she had been was fading, replaced by a hollowed-out shell going through the motions of life. She found herself standing at the edge of the frozen lake behind the cabin, the ice cracked and black, looking into the abyss as it looked into her. The temptation to step forward, to let the numbing cold take the pain away, was a seductive whisper. It would be so easy. The world had already discarded her. What was one more piece of refuse? But then from the cabin she heard a sound. It was Chloe, singing a soft, off-key lullaby to her favorite stuffed animal, a threadbare bear that had been a gift from David. It was a song of stubborn, fragile hope. Ilara turned from the lake, her feet heavy blocks of ice, and walked back to the dim light of the window. She saw her children through the glass, their heads bent together, a small island of love in a sea of cruelty. And in that moment, The serpent of pain uncoiled, and its nature changed. The grief did not vanish, but it was forged in a new fire. The heartbreak did not heal, but it crystallized into something hard, sharp, and unyielding. The tears freezing on her cheeks were no longer of self-pity, but of a terrible, focused rage. This was not just about her. It was about Liam and Chloe. It was about their stolen future, their erased legacy, their worth so carelessly dismissed. Her parents, from beyond the grave, had declared her children unworthy. Isabella had accepted this verdict without a flicker of dissent. A quiet, terrifying resolve settled over her. It was a feeling colder than the winter lake, more solid than the ground beneath her feet. She would not let this stand. She would not let her children be the footnote in Isabella's glorious story. The love she had for them, a love her parents had never understood, was now a weapon. The silence she had kept for years, the silence of the good daughter, the compliant daughter, was over. It was now the silence of the hunter. The ember once drowned had not died. It had been smothered, and in the darkness it had transformed into a diamond-hard core of pure, undiluted purpose. The abyss had shown her its depth, and in return, she had found the bottomless well of her own strength. The following spring was not a season of rebirth, but of meticulous construction. The crumbling cabin was no longer a prison. It was a command center, a forge where a new Ilara was being hammered into shape. The last of the $50,000 was spent not on comforts, but on tools. A powerful second-hand laptop, a secure internet connection, a small desk placed before the window that overlooked the lake. The view was no longer a reminder of desolation, but a mirror of her own calm, reflective surface, hiding turbulent depths. She had been a financial analyst before she depaused her career to raise her family and care for her ailing parents. The skills were rusty, but the mind was sharp, honed by fury and purpose. Her revenge would not be a brutish act of violence. It would be a symphony of ruin, composed in silence and executed with precision. She would not take a life, she would take everything else. Her plan was built on two pillars: knowledge and patience. She began to devour everything. She used her professional expertise to dissect Vance Industries' public filings, tracing the flow of capital, identifying weak points, subsidiaries that were underperforming, assets that were over-leveraged. She cross-referenced this with the snippets of information she had absorbed over a lifetime, her father's offhand comments about nervous board members, her mother's anxieties about certain risky investments. But the true key lay in Isabella. Her sister was not a villain of intellect, but of appetite. She was lazy, entitled, and spectacularly bad with money. Her life was a performance of wealth, a gilded stage propped up by their father's credit lines and constant bailouts. Ilara knew this. She just needed proof. She became a ghost in the digital world. She created anonymous profiles, befriending junior staff at Isabella's favorite charities, her exclusive clubs, her interior designers. She pieced together a mosaic of her sister, ESL life from social media posts, carelessly boasting about new art acquisitions, private jet charters to Mustique, a 7-figure kitchen renovation. The scale of the spending was staggering, even by Vance standards. Ilara cross-referenced these expenditures with the corporate dividends and the trust fund payouts. The math did not add up. Isabella was bleeding capital, and she was almost certainly dipping into the company's reserves to maintain the facade. This was the crack in the foundation. Ilara began to dig. Nights were spent in the blue glow of her screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard, a general moving invisible armies across a digital battlefield. She unearthed shell companies, traced dubious loans, and found a pattern of financial siphoning so brazen it took her breath away. Isabella, with the help of a complicit and equally greedy financial advisor, was not just spending her inheritance, she was systematically looting the company their father had built, jeopardizing its stability and the futures of everyone who depended on it all for another Birkin bag, another Instagram-worthy vacation. Ilara stored every piece of evidence in encrypted files, a dragon hoarding not gold, but the weapons of a coming war. She felt no joy in this, only a cold, clinical satisfaction. This was her art now, her masterpiece. Meanwhile, life at the cabin began to subtly change. She started a small vegetable garden, teaching Liam and Chloe how to nurture life from the soil. The physical labor was a counterbalance to the cerebral hunt. She began homeschooling them. Not just in math and history, but in resilience, in the quiet knowledge that their worth was not determined by anyone's will or wallet. She saw the confusion in their eyes slowly being replaced by a new kind of strength, a wary trust in their mother's newfound silent intensity. She reached out cautiously to a few former colleagues, people she knew to be ethical and discreet. She posed hypotheticals, asked for opinions on complex financial maneuvers, always from the perspective of a writer researching a novel. She was rebuilding her network, not for a job, but for the final act. She identified the two board members her father had always respected most, a stern, old-money traditionalist and a sharp, younger venture capitalist. They were the guardians of the company's soul, the ones who would be most horrified by Isabella's pillaging. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when she discovered a single, massive loan taken against the brownstone, her brownstone, the home of her memories, to cover a margin call on a failed speculative bet Isabella had made. The family home was now collateral for her sister's stupidity. A fresh wave of rage, clean and sharp, washed through her. It was time. The planning was over. The rise was complete. She had climbed out of the abyss not with a ladder, but with a scaffold of her own design, and she was now poised above the world that had cast her down, ready to reclaim not just what was stolen, but to impose a justice so absolute it would become a new family legend. The annual shareholder meeting of Vance Industries was held in a sleek, minimalist auditorium high above Manhattan, a world of glass, steel, and muted power. Alara entered not as a supplicant, but as a specter. She wore a simple, elegant black suit she had saved for years to buy for her father's last birthday party. It was her armor. Her hair was pulled back. Her face, though thinner and etched with the trials of the past year, was a mask of serene composure. In her hand, she carried a slim, unassuming tablet. It contained the meticulously organized proof of a dynasty's unraveling. She took a seat in the back, unnoticed. On the dais, Isabella held court. She was the picture of grieving, powerful heiress, her speech peppered with hollow platitudes about her father, his legacy, and her commitment to stewarding the company forward. The words were a beautiful, empty vase, cracked from within. Ilara watched, her heart a still cold stone in her chest. She saw the way Isabella's eyes flickered with nervousness when questions about certain capital allocations were raised. The way her financial advisor, a man named Sterling, smoothly deflected with jargon. The meeting was winding down, a predictable script being followed. Isabella was about to call for a vote on a new board initiative, one that would conveniently grant her greater control over liquid assets, when Ilara stood. The movement was fluid and silent, but it caught the light, a sudden shift in the room's energy. "A point of order," she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the sterile air. It was not a request. Every head turned. Isabella's face, for a split second, was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock, quickly painted over with a mask of condescending sisterly concern. "Ilara, this is a closed meeting. I'm so sorry, but you don't have the standing." "I have standing as the daughter of Arthur and Eleanor Vance," Ilara interrupted, her voice still quiet, but now carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "And as the guardian of the legacy, you are currently auctioning off for pocket change." She held up the tablet. "I believe the shareholders and the board have a right to see the true state of the company's health, a health currently being poisoned by its CEO." Before Isabella could protest, Ilara tapped the screen. On the massive display behind the dais, the sanitized financial slides were replaced with her own. They were stark, brutal, and devastatingly clear. Line by line, transaction by transaction, she laid it bare. The personal loans disguised as business expenses, the siphoning of funds through the shell company Aurelius Holdings, the mortgage on the brownstone, the millions lost on the failed tech stock bet. She had charts tracing the flow of money from company coffers directly to the accounts of Isabella's interior designer, her jeweler, her private aviation company. The room erupted in a susurrus of gasps and furious whispers. Sterling, the advisor, went pale. Isabella looked like an animal caught in headlights, her mouth opening and closing, her perfectly constructed world collapsing in real time. Ilara continued, her narration a flat, relentless drone, each fact a hammer blow shattering the facade. She spoke not with anger, but with the chilling authority of absolute truth. She revealed how Isabella had been systematically weakening the company, risking pensions, jobs, and the entire Vance empire for her own grotesque consumerism. She saved her final blow for last. She displayed the will. "My parents," she said, her voice softening with a genuine heartbreaking pain, "in their final judgment, saw fit to leave my children, Liam and Chloe, with nothing but a pittance and a ruin. They left Isabella's children everything. I have come to understand that this was not an act of love, but a catastrophic failure of judgment. They entrusted their kingdom to a queen who only knew how to spend, not to rule. They failed to see the strength in loyalty and the rot in vanity." She turned her gaze directly to Isabella, and for the first time, she let the ice in her soul show. "You were given everything, and it wasn't enough. You took from our parents in life, and you disgraced their memory in death. But you will not take my children's future." The room was in chaos. The two board members she had identified stood up, their faces thunderous. The motion was swift, seconded, and passed in a roar of acrimony. Isabella was removed as CEO and chairperson of the board on the spot, her assets frozen pending a full forensic audit. Security escorted a weeping, hysterical Isabella from the dais, her reign of entitlement ending not with a bang, but with a very public, very humiliating whimper. Ilara did not watch her go. She stood alone in the suddenly hushed room, the victor on a field of scorched earth. There was no triumph in her heart, only a vast, echoing emptiness. She had won. She had secured the company, saved it from her sister's greed, and ensured that Liam and Chloe would have their birthright, not just the money, but the security and respect that came with it. The board, in their gratitude and horror, would see to that. But as she walked out of the auditorium, the weight of the past year settled upon her. She had gotten justice, but she had lost her family forever. The memory of her parents was now tarnished. The sister of her youth was now a bitter enemy. The cost of this victory was the complete annihilation of her past. She had reclaimed everything, and in doing so, had obliterated the world she had once known. It was a bittersweet ending, a peace purchased with the currency of her own history. She had spoken after a long silence, and her words had brought a world crashing down. If this story gave you chills or made you feel the power of justice, don't forget to engage. Comment Justice Won if you believe no pain goes unanswered. If you believe revenge isn't cruelty but justice for the broken, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Revenge.